So in this video we're going to talk about how the Roman people gathered to govern themselves. The motto of the Roman people was SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. The affairs of the citizens of Rome were taken care of by the Senate and the people. What this meant to the Romans was that the people were sovereign and governed themselves with the guidance of its eldest and most experienced citizens, the Roman Senate. Etymology sheds a little light on this. Republic comes from the Latin res publica, which means public affairs, and Senate means council of old men. The Romans had several assemblies, each with a different purpose, but two of them are the most important: the Centurion Assembly and the Tribal Assembly. The Centurion Assembly, as previously noted, was in origin the army meeting as a legislature. For this reason, it met outside of the Pomerium on the fields of Mars, since an army could not assemble within the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of Rome. The Centurion Assembly naturally dealt with matters that affected Rome's ability to make war and peace and otherwise interact with other peoples. It voted on legislation relating to war and peace, as well as related issues of budgeting and provisioning. And it elected the magistrates with imperium, the consuls and the praetors who could lead Romans to war, and the censors, who organized them by class and populated the Senate. In the Centurion Assembly, each century got one vote. There were 300 or so centuries, it varied over time, but they were all apportioned by wealth according to the census and were not equal. The wealthiest centuries had fewer members, and so their votes had more weight than someone, say, from the fifth class, who would be in a century with many more of his fellow citizens. The head count got one century. So the Centurion Assembly was skewed toward the needs of those with larger amounts of property. In the ancient world, it would be assumed that those with greater property both had a larger stake in the needs of the community and were more likely to be trained and educated on political and civic matters. The Tribal Assembly met in the Roman Forum in the heart of Rome, and they generally dealt with more domestic kinds of legislation and elected the lower magistrates, aediles and quaestors. This was the same body of Roman citizens, but organized according to tribes, which were geographic according to the territory of Rome. In the Tribal Assembly, each tribe got one vote. Again, the wealthy had an advantage. The tribes associated with wealthier lands had fewer citizens in the tribe, and so each member of that tribe had a vote with more weight. And these tribes with the wealthier lands accounted for most of the 27 or so tribes. The skilled laborers and working poor of Rome itself were covered by only 4 urban tribes. The Tribal Assembly could convene with only its plebeian members, with the patrician citizens excluded and unable to speak or vote, though they could observe from a distance. Under such circumstances, it became the plebeian council. Instead of laws binding on any citizen, which is what the Centurion and Tribal Assemblies could pass, the plebeian council could pass plebiscites, which were originally binding only on plebeians. There was also one special kind of assembly organized by archaic clan membership that came up earlier when we were discussing the regal period, called the Curiat Assembly. For legislation, this was replaced by the Centurion Assembly. But the Curiat Assembly continued to exist with the sole purpose of meeting prior to the inauguration of an elected official to pass a special law granting that man imperium, the ability to compel a citizen while he held that office. The Senate was not an assembly. The Senate could not make laws. Its decisions were not binding in any way. It had no constitutional authority. This is critical to understand. The Senate was not a legislature. It couldn't pass laws. It couldn't bind the citizens to any of its decisions. All it could do was pass resolutions, stating the opinion it had come to as a result of internal debate. That being the case, why does the Senate matter so much, if all it could do was debate things and pass resolutions? First, the Senate consisted of the eldest and most experienced citizens of the Republic. In addition to certain priesthoods, during the Republic, everyone who held the praetorship, consulship, censorship, or dictatorship became a member of the Senate. These were the men who knew what Rome had done before, how things had worked with a particular enemy and what didn't work, how previous internal crises had been resolved. This was the voice of experience, and the wise consul ignored their advice at his peril. Moreover, the nature of Roman elected office gave the Senate a special role. Because the consuls served for 1 year and then left office, they tended to think in terms of what could be accomplished in 1 year. The nature of the consulship encouraged short-term thinking. This left only the Senate to consider the legacy of past actions or the long-term implications of present actions. Increasingly, concerns like what we would call foreign policy became the purview of the Senate. Foreign embassies, for example, would meet with the Senate, and the Senate's advice on legislation relating to other nations or religious matters beyond Rome was often critical. Increasingly, because the consuls were transient, changing every year, the Senate came to see itself as the guardian and protector of Roman ways and customs. Over time, it represented a literally conservative point of view in the sense of seeking to preserve the way things had always been. Toward the end of the Republic, this made the Senate the enemy of those who saw the old ways as dangerously outdated and sought to reform the Roman system around the needs of a new Rome that existed in a wider world, much of which it was coming to dominate and govern. Thus, the stage was set for the civil wars that beset the last century of the Republic. But throughout the story of Rome, the Senate represents and has a self-identity that focuses on the core of the Roman identity and what it is that makes Rome Roman. How do these bodies interact with the magistrates we talked about in the other video? As I mentioned, part of the consul's duties was to convene and preside over the Senate and the assemblies. One of the roles of the consul in relation to these assemblies was to present legislation and oversee the process of passing or defeating that legislation in the assemblies. In fact, Roman laws were usually named according to the person that presented them to the assembly, usually a consul, or in the case of the plebeian council, a tribune of the plebs. The names of the laws went down under the name of the magistrate who presented them to the assembly. So, for example, I mentioned after the death of Brutus at the very beginning of the Republic, supposedly, according to legend, the surviving consul, Publius Valerius Poplicola, proposed a slate of reform populist legislation, which then passed the assembly and resulted in Poplicola being thought of as a hero by subsequent generations. A law passed by a man named Publius Valerius Poplicola would be called a Lex Valeria. Almost all the laws in the story of Roman legislation are so named. Over the course of the Republic, it became customary, but not legally required, for the Senate to discuss a proposed bill before it was presented to one of the assemblies. Normally, what would happen is the consul would convene the Senate and discuss the law under question, which would then be debated by the Senate and a resolution passed. Then the consul would present this law to the assembly along with the senatorial resolution expressing their opinion about the law. This had the positive benefit of acquiring the advice of the politically and religiously experienced members of the Roman governing class. But, given the increasingly conservative nature of the Senate, the custom of senatorial pre-approval had a chilling effect on reform and populist legislation. The Senate's role was always advisory. The Senate advised the consul on his actions. The Senate advised on legislation. It had no binding authority, but its customary role and the weight of its advice The collective auctoritas of its members meant that the Senate's opinion was often a driving force in events, and those who sought reform often had to act in conflict with the membership of the Senate. We'll talk more about how that plays out in future videos. For now, that's that.